This is the official start. We're gonna cut everything else out. So welcome to our live stream. We're doing the final part of our failure to launch series, where we take a closer look at Mike Norvell's passing game and kind of the reasons why it wasn't successful in the past couple of years. And in this episode, I think we're gonna kind of summarize that and look forward to the future to see how it projects, see if there is a future to this passing game, and how long it might take to get there. So. AB, you started us off. You kind of started the written part of these series, the failure to launch part 1, with an offensive line piece. Yeah, Brendan thought it was funny I said launch.
It's just very Irish. My grandma.
It's coming in.
Irish.
It's coming in full, man. Have you ever seen Luck of the Irish movie?
Irish.
Yeah, I lost my amulet.
God.
Oh my god!
I had to watch that movie for St. Patty's Day. Okay, tell me about the offensive line, AB.
They were a mess last year. 21 different starting groups. What's so crazy is, as I was researching that, they had them listed for like 24, and like a couple of them were like Ontario Wilson starting on the offensive line. I was like, I'm not sure that's accurate. But then I did go through them all and double check everybody. 21 different offensive line combinations last year. I'm not sure anybody in here's as football savvy enough to realize how bad that is. Obviously a little exaggeration there, but yeah, 21 different offensive line pairings or groupings last year is not good for your success.
So how does that compare to like what you would expect to see in a good year?
I think Bama was around like 10 or 11.
Yeah, because obviously there's some shifting, some injuries, right?
Yeah, and so, I mean, look, some of those 21 were, garbage time, situations where like a Lloyd Willis got in a game late in the game against like UMass. There were a couple of those.
But we're not facing more garbage time than Alabama.
No, and so that was the concerning part, because for the most part it was like actual games in which they needed 5 bodies out there to be successful and try to win, and it was Brady Scott, and it was just guys you couldn't really depend on. So as we got into the data and started breaking things down, we had a lot of Kevlog in the chat tonight. What's up with that?
Come on, guys. We're all here.
No, it's Kevin Avocado.
Oh, okay.
Acevedo. That's surely what it is.
Yeah, Shirley. I don't know Shirley, but how are you?
Yeah, because
So as we got into the data, and Kev, I don't know if you want to put some of that data up in the background here. I know we had some of that available.
So the offensive line data.
Yeah, so we could talk about it, and it's obviously was in the failure to launch part 1 that is up on Knowles 24/7. If you search back and check that out. Oh, it's Kevin Avocado. God.
Kevin Avocado?
Yeah.
That's surely not how it's pronounced. Yeah, there it is. Avocado. Yeah. From the man himself.
While Kev gets this data up here, please make sure you get in there and hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. But if you're here, it's a good chance you are subscribed.
And if you're listening to this on the podcast on the bench, check out our YouTube channel. We have two YouTube channels. You have X's and Knowles, where Kevin AB put down film breakdowns. They do a great job with that. And they have one up on Justin Turnitin.
Speaking of Turnitin, here's some stats about him.
So I went through and found some of the transfers and kind of plugged them in there. Bless Harris wasn't available. I don't know if it's because of where he was coming from. If that was why he wasn't available for this. And then I had thought I had Dimitri Manuel in there, Big Meech, but apparently not.
Big Meech.
And some of these numbers were skewed because of games played and whatnot. But if you start going through the numbers, the hurries or the pressures, you see Robert Scott at the top there with 21 pressures allowed last year. It's obviously not great. I think some of the better offensive tackles in the country were in the 7, 8, 9, 10, that kind of ballpark. 21's not great. Obviously. Yeah, you can see it there. And as you go,
world's smallest highlighter.
Yeah, and if you go down, I mean, you see 16 for Darius Washington. And the thing to remember is that Florida State only played 12 games last year. They didn't get a bowl game, so they didn't get that +1. Robert Scott didn't start every game last year. So his numbers are also a little off because he played even less games than what some of the higher caliber players across the country played. So there's some concerns, but at the same time, I think that maybe we can talk about this a little bit more. And there's some optimism because I think we know that Robert Scott was dinged up last year. We know that he battled through some injuries throughout the whole season, but also that he's a younger player. There is growth from him that I think that you could kind of project, right?
But for the offensive line?
For Robert Scott, I mean,
yeah, I mean, I think he's got some room to grow. There's reason that I mean, you look at the stats and that they're not overwhelming, but there is a lot of optimism around him, and I think it's because without injury, with more time to develop, I think he is a high ceiling kind of kid.
And if you can get him in a situation where he's, I don't know if they accomplished that this offseason. Ideally, that when they were, he who should not be named, Demarius Mims, was close to coming here. Robert Scott would have probably moved to right tackle or maybe even in a guard, which would have really shifted the dynamic of the offensive line. I think put him in his most natural position. So I don't know if you can necessarily rely on that this year. I think he's going to have to be your starting left tackle still. But if Dylan Gibbons is healthy all season and next to him, that will certainly help out. Or if you're not having this drop off, like if having played an injured Dylan Gibbons or putting in a Brady Scott, which we're going to dive into here with the offensive line depth that AB's mentioned, there are ways for him to improve his game still. And remember, he's only a true junior this year. He's still theoretically ascending.
Yeah, I mean, his body's still developing. He's still finding his strength. We broke down his film at times last year. There's times he gets beat with speed, but there's also times he gets beat with power. And you would hope going into being a true junior that he can eliminate some of the times that he's beat by power. He should be able to anchor against some of those bull rushers and hold up a little bit better as he's had another full off season to get his body right. And as he's matured and developed. Darius Washington on the other side, I don't know I don't know how to talk about him because I don't think we know where he's going to be at this point, right? I mean, is he a right tackle? Is he a right guard? I would love to see him at center. People keep asking me what my ideal starting five is, and it really for me is him at center, and I don't know if that's where they're going to put him. I don't know if they've made any of those decisions at this point. They're probably going to get into camp and try to figure those things out. Not to mention he missed a little bit of time in the off season with with an injury that he had to recover from and rehab. And I don't think it wasn't anything major, correct, Brendan?
Nothing major. It was a light procedure, and we actually saw him a couple weeks ago at one of the camps as a counselor for one of the recruiting camps, and had a knee brace on, but was moving well and seemed in good spirits and didn't seem like he lost any weight or anything like that. So I don't think it's anything that's going to compromise him too much.
And so, I mean, I think it probably would be best to get into this conversation now. And I think it's a conversation that's been had across all forums about the offensive line, Bless Harris, Darius Washington. If you're putting him somewhere, where are you putting him? Washington, that is.
I think that's the hard thing about Washington is I do think he's genuinely one of your better offensive linemen, but he's not a true anything. And so there's pros and cons to that, right? He's not going to be a true tackle. He's probably more of a guard, but you can slot him in at center. I think for that reason, you'll see him kind of play all around as the season goes on, as they kind of get a feel for, there's 4 new bodies on this line that are all going to be competing for snaps. And so it's nice to have someone like Washington who can slot in anywhere, but I think that also means that, there's a chance he might be put aside if other guys step up, because he might not be your best guard, but he might be your third best guard and third best tackle,
Here's what's sorry, Brendan, I just wanted to make this point. Here's what's odd about Darius Washington is he very well could be your best offensive lineman.
Yeah, I think he might be, but
that was frozen.
No,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Kev.
No, I think he might be your best offensive lineman, but I'm not sure he's I think he's a little bit of a tweener in my opinion, and I don't know where I'd put him.
It is this double-edged sword with him. I would contend that he probably was your most consistent offensive lineman. He was certainly the most reliable in terms of like being available and playing decently and getting better as the year went on last year. I mean, outside I think of the Florida game, the season finale, which he played on a bum wheel, like that was his only sack he allowed all season. Navy pointed out the pressures he allowed, but he cut down earlier in his career when there was a mistake. It was often the catastrophic mistake that would lead to like a quick sack. He cut that off and he got better at it. So I thought he was actually pretty good at tackle, and especially at right tackle. I understand the appeal of like just his size. He might project better as a guard, but Kevin and I were there this spring. Like he didn't look super comfortable there. Now it was a transition period for him, but I thought he looked much more natural at tackle. We know he's worked at center some before too. I think ultimately, like the ideal role for him this year, if you can afford this, if this is a luxury that you're able to kind of stumble upon, is if he is that swing guard and swing tackle for you. He's someone that you can kind of, someone gets hurt or needs to take a series out, you can put him in there and things don't take this huge plunge. So yeah, that's an interesting dynamic with him for sure.
Yeah, and what's best is I think you've got a couple guys that you could do that with. Dimitri Manuel's a young man who comes in as a starter at his last program. And I wouldn't call him an elite starter, but a higher caliber player for where he's coming from. But he's a young man who could play tackle. He could play guard. I think, again, even if you needed to in a pinch, he could probably step in and play center. You've got guys who can move all over the place, which is nice. What the hell? All right. There's some wild stuff going on in the chat right now.
Bro, I don't have the chat pulled up, so I have no idea what's happening with it. It's probably for the best.
It is for the best. So anyway, So what's nice is I think that they're in a position now where they've got an opportunity to get their best five out there and also have the opportunity to give guys a break, move guys around if they need to. They can get themselves into good positions now in a game. Whereas in the past, you were stuck that if somebody got hurt, Brady Scott was coming in. And I don't think it mattered where it was. That's what you had. That's all you had. So, I look at all this data and looked at all the stuff with the offensive line, and at the end of the day, it's like really the offensive line was bad because they just didn't have any options. They're young at some key positions, mainly offensive tackle. Center, they were bad because Maurice Smith, he fought injury the entire year. And this is a young man we haven't talked about yet, but he fought an injury the entire year with the back. He's been, underweight since he got here. Hasn't had an opportunity to get himself to the weight that he needs to be at to be successful as a center at Florida State. And they're getting into spots now where they aren't forced to play him. They aren't forced to play Darius Washington if they have to, or if they don't want to. They can move Robert Scott around now if they so choose. I have some concerns about some of the guys coming in. Turnitine coming in, he's got a month to kind of get caught up. That's concerning, right? We heard Dylan Gibbons last year talk about how difficult it is to come in and kind of get, just dive right in and be at your best. You could say the same with Big Meech. He's a young man who's been with the program for how long now? A month.
Although he does have experience in Alec Atkins' system,
right.
Which
at least
helps. 1 year of it, which is not insignificant. I don't know if it's a ton, but something.
No, I don't think so. I think it helps, but at the same time, so when we're talking about depth, there are concerns about that depth. But so what does all this mean for the passing game? I think realistically, you can go into the season feeling like on standard passing downs you have a chance, right? I mean, is that crazy to say?
Yeah, I mean, when I point to kind of where this offensive line is compared to where it was a couple years ago, 2 years ago you had a freshman Darius Washington starting as your left tackle, and now he's a guy where we're figuring out where we put him based off what's most convenient. And so I think that's a positive sign. That's a move in the right direction. I think that, yeah, while they're not going to blow you away, I think they're an average ACC offensive line. I think we might be a half step behind the projection everybody's been talking about, but I mean, as it stands today, you've got a lot of pieces who can go in there, and I just don't think there's that drop off that we were seeing before.
Eight guys that you don't feel awful about, which I know the standard at Florida State should be a little higher, but if you've been following along since 2018, like 8 is kind of the magic number that you want of this core level of competency, right? Mark Norvell talks about you want 7 to 8 guys to be able to rely on during the season. So off the top of my head, we have Robert Scott, Darius Washington, Maurice Smith, Dylan Gibbons, all coming back. And then you add Caden Lyles from Wisconsin, who has some good film and 1 or 2 bad games too, but mostly solid at Wisconsin. So him, Wes Harris, who looked okay this spring, Kev, right?
I thought he looked. I was expecting him to struggle and Lyles to be an immediate impact guy, and I think I actually saw the opposite.
It was kind of the other way around. No, I'm with you there, and I thought Bless Harris was a poor take at the time, and I can eat crow and say I think that was he'll be serviceable at the very least. But then you have Big Meech as well, and then Justin Turnitine, who I'm very much looking forward to Florida State's announcement and pronunciation guide so I can remember it and say the last name correctly consistently. But those are 8 guys with multiple years of starting experience at various levels, and basically the reason why I think AB you can feel good is that you don't have to play Lloyd Willis unless something catastrophic happens. Right. You don't have to play Rod Orr unless something really, 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 really bad happens. So these are insurance policies that should elevate the week-to-week production of your passing game, even just marginally, and provide a little more consistency.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the key. You're going to find yourself, even if it's 2, 3, 4 plays in a game, where you find yourself having a better chance in a drop back passing situation. That's a hell of a win, I think, for where they've been over the last couple of years. I mean, I wouldn't say that in any 3rd and 11 situation over the last however many years that they stood a chance at all. And I think going into this season with the group that they have now, the competition that I think they're going to be able to roll out there, because you're not going to be able to just kind of roll over in practice and assume that you're the best. I think the whole #work mantra will stand true this year because of the depth that we're talking about, that 3 or 4 opportunities a game, and in passing situations in a game now, it could be the difference. And we know how many 1-score games they were in last year. We know how many 1-score games are kind of projected to be in this upcoming season. Ultimately, you could be talking about the difference in games just by adding a couple capable, competent bodies at the offensive line room. I think that's important, right? I mean, we sat here before. I know we're rambling on about the O-line, but I do think that this is where it all starts and stops.
Right.
We sat here before we kind of made the move over, and we sat and talked with you, Brendan, about how many offensive line prospects to bring in. And you thought 4. And I mean, look what they did.
Yeah, they brought in, I mean, they
had 2. They went on and got 2 more. They tried to get a big dog. That fell apart for reasons way outside of their control. I think that they did what they needed to do this offseason to shore up the position that I think that they know, the 2 positions, and we're gonna let's get into wide receivers next here.
Yeah, I was gonna say
the 2 positions that they knew that they needed to fix the most: wide receiver and offensive line. They went out and they allocated 4 scholarships at both positions, 8 total between the 2.
Yeah,
it's for a reason.
Yeah, big time.
Real quick, guys, will we revisit the offensive line at all? Or because I have a stat I want to drop it. If we're
absolutely, drop it out there.
Drop it right now.
Let's get it all out of here.
All right. So according to Pro Football Focus, I think this is just going to be like when you look about the potential upgrades that AB was just alluding to. So like Caden Lyles, for example, his 3-year pass block grade, which like for PFF, for those who don't know, if you're in the 60 range, that's about average. If you're in the high 60s, that's getting to above average replacement level. Below 60, below average. So at Wisconsin, in about 300 snaps, he was always between each season 60 to 69.4. Nice. So he was average. He was a capable pass blocker at Wisconsin. Maurice Smith, the last 2 seasons, had a pass block grade of 32.6 and 38.4. And that's awful. That's probably one of the worst in the Power 5 for a center. So just upgrading the core competency. And part of that is because, again, Maurice Smith has had to play underweight and had to play hurt sometimes. That's going to affect your productivity. But that totally changes the dynamic of your offensive line and pass blocking, right? If you can upgrade that. And then the other stat I was going to throw out there was Dimitri Manuel versus Devontae Love-Taylor. DLT played hurt last year for Florida State, and his pass block grade was 67.6, which is actually solid. Dimitri Manuel in his lone season with Alex Atkins, granted at a lower level of football, was 76.5. So probably going to be standard, or at least not having a drop off there, and maybe even an improvement. So those are, when we're looking at the potential upgrades, like those are things that I think we need to consider in projecting this team out. The guys who were maybe struggling last year, you've probably upgraded a little bit when it comes to pass pro.
So in my opinion, I think think of it like a chain, right? It's your weakest link, but as soon as you strengthen other parts of the chain, the whole thing goes together. So another important cog that was strengthened, I think we would all agree, was wide receiver. And Brendan, you talked about that, right?
Yes. So yeah, I went in depth with the wide receiver play, and yeah, you can watch something and say, hey, that doesn't quite look right. But then once you start, and if you guys are familiar with the X's and O's channel, like Kev's favorite play is what? Kev, you want to describe it real quick? So we can't show it on the specific channel, but go ahead and paint the picture, if you will.
This is why I have this pulled up. So this is slot fade, and if you're listening to this on a podcast, try to stick with me here. But basically, it is what it says. So the slot receiver, so not the outside receiver, but a guy inside of him, runs a fade that's a little bit loose of a fade. And basically, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get your slot receiver, who's usually a smaller, speedier guy, kind of ISO'd on a safety or an outside linebacker. And in theory, that's a mismatch, and you're getting a deep shot down the field. Your outside receivers in this situation are just going to run hitches. So the quarterback is reading it much in the same way he would read like a smash concept, where you're basically high-lowing this corner. If he stays up, you've got a one-on-one with a safety or an outside linebacker on a deep shot. If he goes back, then you'll just take the easy yards here. On the hitch. And yeah, so Norvell likes these plays. He doesn't want to overload his quarterback with too many reads, and he likes to take a deep shot. So they're going to run the ball. They're going to try to suck these safeties up, and they're trying to take advantage when these safeties get sucked up by hitting that slot fade. So going over the top when there's no more safety help from running the ball, keeping the defense honest. And we saw at Memphis in a video I did a couple times, a couple videos ago, that, this works. And when you have the talent, when you have the pieces, this works. When you don't have the talent and you don't have the pieces, we saw that this hasn't been working at Florida State, because what wasn't happening was when this slot receiver was getting a one-on-one matchup with a guy he should beat, he wasn't winning. So that means that the defense is allowed to kind of take these safeties and cheat him down in the box. And if you watch that last video I did, Clemson just had their safeties sitting here because they knew that, Florida State's not going to win this. And so bringing in a wide receiver that consistently can beat a safety in man coverage, can beat a backside corner in man coverage is important for Norvell's scheme. I personally wouldn't have ran it with the wide receiver core we had at Florida State last year, but it's their defense, and it's their offense. It's what they want to run, and so it's their responsibility to get guys in that can run that.
So part of what you articulated well, Kev, is like that this is to get those one-on-ones, and like that fades a particular concept they did run a lot at Memphis that you are like outlined previously. So as a coach, you want to stick to like what you know and what you do well, right? Like in theory, and especially in the NFL, like that's what these coaches like. They always talk about one-on-ones. That's what we want to do is create one-on-ones and get our playmakers in space. I mean, Mike Norvell talks about this offense being the offense built for playmakers, and in doing the research, like the eye tests and the metrics matched up. They didn't have playmakers at wide receiver. Not only did they not have playmakers, guys who were dynamic, they were largely some of the worst wide receivers in the Power Five. So it's an awful combination. And I'm not trying to dog anyone personally. Like we're gonna talk about Keyshawn Helton, and he's someone that Kev has outlined. Like I love Keyshawn Helton as a person, and that knee injury robbed him of some of his athleticism, and it's a damn shame. But like, so pulling up like success rate. So success rate for targeting a wide receiver, and that's just the layman terms. It's basically dependent on down and distance, how many yards you need to get for a successful play, and how often you reach that yardage. The success rate should be about like 50% or so on average for targeting a wide receiver. In man coverage, Ontario Wilson has a success rate of 21.3%. Andrew Parchment, success rate of 26.7%. Keyshawn Helton, success rate of 33.3% against man coverage. And those are 3 out of your 4 most used wide receivers last year, and those numbers are pretty damning. The only other numbers I want to read out here real quick, and it's tough because you could say, well, like maybe the quarterback didn't get them the ball in the right place, or these numbers could be skewed and whatnot. But I think when you put them all together, to the totality of it is pretty damning. So the first stat is FSU success rate in general when targeting wide receivers versus man coverage was 37.3%. That was 106 nationally out of 130 teams. So bad, right? FSU's wide receivers averaged 4.1 yards after the catch per reception. That was 115th nationally. To me, that number kind of shows, do you have wiggle? Do you have juice? Do you have dynamicism, right? Is that a word, dynamicism? I think so. If not, I made it up. So the final stat is FSU's success rate on wide receiver screens, which again, you get the ball to a wide receiver short, let him make a play. That was 23.5% success rate. That was 122nd nationally. I have 112th written down on the story. I'm going to go edit that now, even though it's like a week old. So anyways, that is in a nutshell how bad FSU's wide receivers were last season, fellas. It's problematic, and it's really tough to be a balanced offense when your wide receivers can't win one-on-ones.
Yeah. So somebody in the chat asked, separation off the line of scrimmage, how much of this is coaching and how much is innate talent, instinctual?
Maybe you're the coach.
I mean, I've been a big detractor of Ron Dugan's personally. Yep. And I don't think there's a lot of people out there standing for him right now, really wanting him to be leading this wide receiver core. And I'm not a wide receiver coach, so I can't sit and give you all of the finer details of a wide receiver play. It's not something I've spent a lot of time with. I've coached quarterbacks and offensive line and a couple defensive positions in my time. But I know that they consistently don't get off the ball well. I know they didn't consistently get off the ball well at Miami. I know his wide receivers didn't consistently get off the ball well at Louisville. At some point when it looks like a rat, smells like a rat, by golly, it might be a rat. Not to go all TO on you there, but I mean, I think there's a problem, but I also think the bigger problem is the talent issue. Some of Brendan's data there, I mean, really speaks to how unathletic these guys are. You talked about Keyshawn Helton. I mean, these are guys that they couldn't get through an arm bar from a D-back. They couldn't get off of any type of press. They can't run away from anybody and separate. And then it's great if you've got all this wiggle at the line of scrimmage, but if you can't put your foot in the dirt and be explosive, you're not gonna beat anybody. And ultimately, that I think was the big problem with this wide receiver core, is when they put their foot in the ground, they just don't go fast enough to win anything. And I don't think there's any coach in America that could get that out of them.
I think that, I mean, the recruiting rankings say that you shouldn't have the worst wide receiver core in the Power Five, and I think you do. But I think there's also been a string of bad luck on a certain situation where if in a year span you have a high 4-star not show up, you have the number 1 receiver in the class, do what he did. You have high talent transfer, get in a car accident as soon as he commits. So there are some reasons why the talent necessarily isn't where it is. I think the route running is subpar, and I think a lot of that is coaching.
I would agree with
that. Before we get too far away, I did want to address this question. So we've established the wide receivers are bad. And so the question is, will they improve? And someone asked about Johnny Wilson, and I kind of wanted to bring this up because I already had it drawn up from earlier. So the thing about Johnny Wilson is that even if he's not giving you much in the passing game per se, he kind of gives you a lot in the running game, right? So what they're going to do with him a lot is kind of have him out as this short receiver, this short slot guy here, a little nub end. And so if you're going to line up a corner on him, he's big enough, strong enough to block that corner, and you run outside zone or something along those lines to try to get that edge. If you instead, maybe put a second safety in here or a bigger guy, then in theory you can run some routes to kind of take advantage of a slower defender out here. So that's what they're going to try to do with Johnny. And if he can catch, I think that he really expands your offensive playbook. But what do you guys think about some of the newcomers?
I'll let Brent start.
Okay. All right. So I was pulling up my stats real quick because I had some metrics, but I don't even, I leaned heavily on metrics before. So let's just go with the eye test of what we know. So the new wide receivers coming in are Johnny Wilson, that Kev mentioned. He's huge. Was one of the best blocking wide receivers in the country last year. I've mentioned the ability to catch the ball consistently. That was something that was problematic at Arizona State. It was problematic in the spring, to be quite frank, as well. Now, he had some really good moments as well, but that inconsistency is what you're trying to fix, because he's a former top 100 wide receiver at 6'7" with a lot of physical tools. Can he be reliable? Another guy who comes from out west and same high school as Johnny Wilson is Micah Pittman from Oregon, was a pretty impressive punt returner this past year. Brother of Michael Pittman, who's a star wide receiver in the NFL, and son of Michael Pittman, who was a pretty good running back for the Tampa Bay Bucks for a while when we were a little bit younger. So Pittman's been pretty good during his career, but never like dynamic. I think never more than 300 yards receiving in a season. Now, he has voiced frustration with usage and changing of coordinators, and kind of someone who feels like he got caught in limbo with the COVID year. So we'll see if they can ignite that. And then the last guy of note, I guess Deuce Spann is one, super speedy wide receiver from Illinois, but converted quarterback. We saw him this spring, super raw. And the last guy, and this has a big question mark, a big variable here, but that's Winston Wright from West Virginia. All the metrics, all just the normal stats and the advanced ones, and just the film too, shows that he's probably the most dynamic wide receiver that you brought in this spring. Would have been your number one wide receiver at the start of the season if you knew for sure he's healthy. I'm talking about in past tense because, frankly, I don't know exactly what we're going to see from Winston Wright this year. He suffered an accident, a leg injury. Hang on, 3, 2, 1, right? He suffered a leg injury in a car accident this past spring, and we're not entirely sure what that's going to look like for him. His family's optimistic that he'll be good to go at the start of the season, but yeah, we don't know for sure how that's going to potentially slow him down. So those are the additions, but guys, I can't confidently say it's going to be a markedly overhauled or significantly more dynamic wide receiver room. We just don't know that right now.
Oh, but I think what's interesting is that I think we can safely say that it's going to be better because some of the data does suggest that these guys are better than what's been there. We looked at some of Micah Pittman's success rate numbers against press coverage. We did the same with Winston Wright. They were drastically better than what's been on this roster. Sample size may come into play on some of that, but it is what it is. You just got to trust the data to some extent. I think it's a lot like the offensive line group. You get Ja'Kai Douglas in another year where Gator Kirk, if we can't pass, let's run the wishbone. I like that. I'll come install the wing T.
Let's do it.
You've got Ja'Kai Douglas, who's a player that I think you're looking to take another step forward in his third year in the program. He's a guy who realistically had a good spring, flashed towards the end of the year, especially in the Miami game. What's up, Wayne Jr. in the chat? Flashing that game, flashing a few games down the stretch. He's kind of more of a specialty player. I don't know if you guys want to speak to his usage from the spring. He's a guy you're going to get on wheel routes. You're going to try to get him matched up on some of these slot fade concepts down the field. Johnny Wilson, if anything, even if he can't catch the ball, he's such a big body. He's going to force a team to have to account for him with their safeties because of how well he blocks. Kev, I don't know if you want to pull that graphic or the blackboard back up.
Yeah.
But teams aren't going to be able to roll their safeties. Teams aren't going to be able to roll that safety away from him because he's going to obliterate any corner he's matched up with.
Right.
So when you want to start talking about running outside zone over there, you've got numbers if they rotate to the if they roll that free safety into the middle of the field.
Yeah.
So now suddenly teams aren't going to be able to do that, which is going to open up some advantages to your trip side. So even if he can't catch a Cole Butnick in Alaska, I do think he helps you because of what he can be as a blocker. I think it's reasonable to project he's going to be able to catch the ball a little bit. Is it going to be consistent enough? I don't know. Is it going to come back to bite you in the butt? Maybe. But he is going to absolutely eliminate defenders with his blocking skills.
Yeah, it's forcing this defense to keep a safety over here, meaning that you're basically strong-handing them into playing some kind of man or a 3-over-3 on the strong side. And so again, it comes down to what he does is he makes matchups for you. But the question still is Pittman or is Wright going to be healthy, or is whoever going to be able to win this one-on-one matchup once you force this safety this direction?
And I'm higher on Pittman, I think, than most people generally were, even when he was coming in, and then kind of seeing him in the spring, and especially the back half of the spring, you saw the ability to win one-on-ones. He made, what was it, like almost every day, right? Like he was making a contested, difficult catch.
Pittman was looking pretty good. We went through and watched his game in the spring game a couple weeks back, isolated every play from him, and I think he was able to kind of get open when he runs better routes than anybody you have on this roster. What that says about coaching is one thing, but I think he struggled a little bit against some of the longer new guys. I think AZ Thomas did a good job shutting him down, and McCall did as well. But yeah, I think he has a chance to get open, and between him and I think Ja'Kai Douglas will step up a little bit. I think you'll have 1 out of 2 guys there that could potentially win those slot fades.
Yeah,
which is big. I had one coach that's familiar with Micah Pittman basically say, like, compared to what FSU had last year, this is a Pac-12 coach. Like they're like, hey, with what FSU had last year, Micah Pittman might only be like a potential like 6th round, 7th round draft pick, maybe not even that, but even if he's in that conversation by the end of the year, like that's a significant upgrade to what Florida State had year before. So this is, and when we're talking about like this is kind of similar to the offensive line, even if it's not going to necessarily be pretty, if you can take something that is, even if it's still a weakness per se, but if it's not a bottom dwelling, like worse than Power 5 weakness, then that should in theory make everything else better on offense.
Yeah, in the context of trying to get this program to winning 7-8 games, I mean, I think where you've gotten your floor and your ceiling to some extent is, I think you're kind of there. You're going to have to go out and capitalize, and they're going to have to put all these things together that we're talking about. The offensive line is going to have to take the next step, and the depth's going to have to show up. The wide receivers, somebody in that room, Micah Pittman, Johnny Wilson, Winston Wright, if he's available, are going to have to show that they can win the ball down the field, be a threat. I think it's probably a good time to take a step into the next realm of what we've been discussing, though, right, Kev?
Yeah. So should we? I guess we should address Jordan Travis before we move on to kind of
hot takes incoming.
Before we move on to anything else, because between the three of us, we all kind of took our shots at the passing game, and none of us felt like Jordan Travis was the problem. But I guess you guys can go ahead and defend that one. I've got my opinions, but I want to hear y'all first.
I'm the Jordan Travis, the J Trav president on those 24/7. And this is coming from someone who was very critical of him a couple years ago. Like his debut spring game where he completed a handful of passes and looked solid. I was there for the spring practices. Remember, like the wind, like, he struggled to throw the ball into the wind. And we start getting, feedback from coaches, and none of it was really pretty. And I think part of that was Jordan like losing his confidence, and that he's talked about. So anyways, this is coming from someone who was critical of him and saw like incremental growth over the last 2 seasons, and saw it like at the beginning, especially this past preseason camp. And you see him start being able to throw the ball with a little bit more confidence. And like, don't get me wrong, there are still limitations to his game. I think we could be getting close to seeing his ceiling from a talent perspective, but he did a lot of things right last year, not just in the context of like helping Florida State avoid disaster because the other quarterbacks the last 2 years like couldn't do anything, and your record without him is probably 0-4 or maybe just 1 win. But like, he legitimately put pressure on defenses as a passer as the year went on. We saw that against Miami at times. We saw it against Boston College. Like, he was starting to make some legitimate throws that, so between what the eyes show and the metrics, like there's something there.
So you had an interesting metric that I thought was good that will kind of cement what we're saying. Yeah, first of all, Bradley, I know you're kidding, but Jordan Travis is not the worst quarterback in Florida State history. He's not the worst quarterback in Florida State 2021. So that would kind of make that statement impossible. What were the splits on the offensive yards per play with and without Jordan Travis? Because I think that's like, you can just show that stat and be like, all right, the team is better with Jordan Travis.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to, I don't have him right there, Kevin.
Oh, I thought you had him. I thought we were prepped for this.
I thought we were pulling up the radar chart. Is what I thought we were doing. I mean, if you want to pull that up and
I can pull up the radar chart while you try to find those stats.
Yeah, we'll find the splitsies.
All right, so this is the heat map, kind of where Jordan Travis likes to throw, and it kind of shows what I was talking about earlier, and what I've talked about in my past 2 videos is that Mike Norvell. So this is the line of scrimmage here, a big fat pin here, and you can see that in this heat map. If you guys are listening on a podcast, you'll just have to use your imagination. They like to throw it down the sideline. So if you imagine, so screens here. Actually, I think I drew that wrong. So this is the line of scrimmage. So they like to do a lot of screens, a lot of passes to the running back out of the backfield. And then they like to throw it down the sideline, either in these slot fades or in fades to the outside receiver on like, so they'll have trips and the backside receiver will be isolated one-on-one, and they'll try to hit fades to that guy. But you see not a ton of throws over the middle. You see a few of these kind of posts and
some over concepts.
But not a ton of them. You see the majority of the throws are on the sidelines at the line of scrimmage, trying to get those screens, trying to hit the deep shot after you've pulled them up. And that's kind of how Mike Norvell runs his offense. So this was your chart you wanted to include. What do you got to say here, Brendan?
So this is, to me, so yeah, it's going to show the perimeter stuff, right? But I think the middle of the field, when you look between the line of scrimmage and 10 yards there, that was something that was non-existent for Jordan last year, or was very, very rare. So something that at least he started to be a little bit more aggressive with it. I don't know if we have the passing bin.
Yeah, we do.
So that's going to show his success rate that Kev's going to pull up when going over the middle of the field.
So this is the 2021 one.
Yep. So you see, and for people listening on the podcast, so basically in the middle of the field, both like basically anything that's not to the perimeter, from 20 yards down to the line of scrimmage, he had a successful passing ratio in that area that he was targeting the field in all 6 of the bids. So just outside the hash on the left, short, and a little bit deeper in the middle of the hashes, and then to the right of the hashes. So the year before, the middle of the field was a complete disaster for Jordan. So not only was he successful, but he was markedly improved as well. which is why you have to have a little bit of optimism for where the passing game is going under Jordan.
Yeah, so this
There
is
it Look at
2020. You see the struggle in the middle of the field. So this is where the narrative started, right? So there was a narrative, and there still remains to be a narrative, that Jordan Travis can't throw the ball over the middle, and that's a lot to do with the 2020 season. And this graph you're seeing here, I mean, this is abysmal.
Yeah, 33% over basically from 10 yards, or from 0 yards to 20 yards, 33% success rate in the middle of the field.
But you can see that he has dramatically improved as a passer. At least in that range.
Definitely. And some of the deep ball stuff is a little bit more, it's so hit or miss. It's such a small sample size, but he's pretty much better in every single area year over year. And I mean, the supporting cast wasn't markedly better or different.
Yeah, so to support that opinion, and I personally think Jordan Travis is going to improve. This is the passer efficiencies of all of the years that Mike Norvell has been a head coach. And you can see Riley Ferguson was the quarterback in 2016, improved by 2017. Then Brady White took over, and you can see new quarterback, obvious drop in efficiency. And then he had his best year in 2019. Then Jordan Travis takes over, drop in efficiency, doesn't have a good roster around him. Wasn't the strongest passing quarterback, as we just showed, but you see an improvement. So every year that Mike Norvell's had a quarterback for a second year, they've improved. And so,
it's also funny that some of those worst years were with Kenny Dillingham as the offensive coordinator.
Yeah. Okay. So this is Dillingham.
2018 that you're signaling.
Yeah, 2018. That was by far Memphis's worst offense. In pretty much every metric was 2018. So I mean, you can pretty much bring up any stat. I don't have it pulled up currently, but let's see. Their offense was 2016 30th, then 18th, and then 40th with Kenny Dillingham, offensive coordinator, then 8th when he left. So he left and the offense jumped up 32 spots. The thing is, the story is the same at Auburn. In 2018, they were the 26th best offense. Then 2019, they were the 33rd, and then Dillingham shows up, and they became the 48th best offense. So they dropped 15 ranks in Kenny Dillingham's time. And I mean, there's other factors that account for stuff like that. It's not all his fault that all of this is happening. But I thought that Brendan brought up an interesting stat the other day. He found something rather interesting. You want to talk about the motion stuff?
Ooh, the motion stuff. Yeah, let's find the motion stuff while you're pulling that up. Real quick, I did find the splits for Jordan Travis, and this is going to be revelatory to people who watch the games. Obviously, the offense moved much better with Jordan Travis. 6.24 yards per play with Jordan Travis at quarterback. Without him, FSU was at 5.08 yards per play. Now, if you're talking about the 6.24 average, that gets you to 41st nationally. So a well above average offense comparatively.
You're saying 41st? And the stats I'm seeing has 6.2 as top 25.
Hang on, let's make sure.
But they might be counting them differently. I was ready for this.
You had it ready to go. This is saying for 6.2. This is saying 40th. Now I have a 2021. I have no. Hang on.
Well, either way,
we're still talking about 20 to 40 range is kind of that third tier probably of offenses where you're still above average.
Compared to what when it was gone? 5.08. So
5.08.
You're averaging 1.2 yards better when he's in the game,
which is, it doesn't sound like a lot if you're not used to this kind of stuff, but yeah, this is, I mean, how many plays are run per game for a Florida State? 70.
Yeah, you're probably in the 70 range.
So you're talking about that's a touchdown. You're driving the length of the field and scoring. Difference.
There's a huge difference. So here's the motion stats that you
found. Motion stats. Let's get into it. Crazy. This is crazy.
These are. So
all right.
Describe it to me.
You want me to get it? Okay, I'm going to paint a picture for the people listening here. So when FSU ran a pre-play motion, There was 42 attempts. The average passer rating was 198.1. They had a completion percentage of 71.4%. The yards per attempt was 10.4%. These numbers are awesome. And that's elite stuff. If you're averaging 198 passer rating, that's Jameis Winston-esque.
Almost maxing out passing efficiency here.
It's crazy. So without, which most teams aren't going to run motion a majority of the plays, but there's a pretty big discrepancy. 42 for motion, 151 passing plays without. So 3 times more than that. When FSU didn't have a motion, the passer rating was 134.5 with a completion percentage of 60.3.
Yeah.
Yards per attempt down to 7.1. So that's a different. That's guys, help contextualize that for me. That's a huge deal.
Yeah, it's massive. There's not really another way to put it. I think that the 42 attempts maybe skews us a little bit, but 10.4 yards per attempt is pretty good. I would have loved to go in and know the plays that they're running on that. I mean, I know some of the wheel route stuff that they did was based off of motion. They did some stuff when they hit some of those deep crossers and deep posts. It seems like they tried to develop their shot plays off of motion, which makes sense because you're moving guys. But motion cleans the picture up for a quarterback. I don't know why they didn't use it more often for a wide receiver core that really lacked any type of playmaker as we've laid out pretty clearly. And then just to get a better picture for Jordan, who is still a developing quarterback. I don't know. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me to stand still and be stagnant when you can get guys moving around and try to make things clearer for your quarterback. Now, obviously, they're running more of a running offense by nature. That's what Mike wants to do. So when you start moving guys around, it does change some of your fits for the run game. So it does make sense from that aspect why you would not want to run as much motion. But looking at those numbers, it makes me scratch my head why they didn't lean into a little bit more.
So I think one of the biggest factors, people, and you kind of nailed it on the head here, is kind of allowing your receivers room, space, an advantage, right? So in my last video, I talked about when you don't have the best receivers, you have to work extra hard to try to spring an advantage, right? So by putting a guy in motion before they run slot fade, you're now giving them a running start. You're making it harder for the defense to align to him. You're doing all of these things that make life easier for the wide receiver. And you actually saw them score a touchdown against, I believe, Boston College off of this motion. So Ontario Wilson went on motion, ran slot fade. He was wide open and he scored. I found another stat that kind of infuriated me as I was going through this. So this is the percent of plays that they ran with motion plotted by game number. So you would think that if you're doing your math and you're saying that, okay, well, they're more successful when they're running plays with motion, you'd think that over the course of the season, they would continue to use more and more motion. So you see the games in red are the games they lost. They lost the first 4 games. I'm sure you guys remember that. But I think it's interesting that out of the top 6 plays that in terms of motion percentage, 5 of them were wins. And this one was the one where they put up 20 points on a really, really elite defense in Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
So my question always is, what happened with game 9 and 12? I know it's not as simple as run more motion and win more ball games, but there's a severe drop off in games 9 and 12.
Who was game 9?
McKenzie, that was NC State.
Was that NC State? So the flu game.
Flu game.
So they had a lot of guys not practicing, could have impacted the game plan. I'm not sure with Florida what happened.
Strange. Unless Jordan getting dinged up for a little bit made them skew their game plan.
Yeah, perhaps. The first 4 were damning to me. As I started writing my offensive line piece, the first part, it was supposed to be kind of 3 things that I thought held the passing game back. And immediately the first quote that I went to was, I swear I'm not trying to, Kenny knows way more about football than I'll ever pretend to know. But I went to Kenny's quote after that Wake Forest game, which was game 4. And he talked about how they weren't ready for the man coverage that they saw in that game. And, Wake Forest was so heavily a cover, I believe it was a cover 4 team.
I think they're a cover 3 team usually.
Well, that they were a big zone team. They weren't prepared for the man coverage. And I slapped myself thinking, if you self-scouted your team, and I believe that they were confident that they had a very poor skill group. I know, some sources have shared that they felt that the skill group was lacking. So if you knew that and you self-scouted, how the hell do you not come to the conclusion that, yes, maybe they're a predominant zone team? How are you not prepared for man coverage? And it's like after that 4th game, then they started running mesh. They started running some things and being more prepared for the man coverage that they knew that they were going to then see throughout the season, because teams looked at this wide receiver core and said, we don't have to do anything else. We can play one-on-one out here and just dominate the football. It really makes me scratch my head.
This is my favorite stat about Dilly.
All right.
So in 2019, Memphis ran 151 plays. This is without Dillingham as offensive coordinator. They ran 151 plays with motion. In the 2018 team, the year before, that was significantly worse in all the advanced metrics. How many plays do you think they ran with motion?
I think you shared this one at like 2.
It's 4.
Yeah, I think that's sad. So Brett, we pulled the stat up. The FSU was 119th nationally with 56 plays with motions before passes. It's 119th nationally.
Yeah.
2019 under Alex Atkins, 213 plays with motion.
What was 13th nationally.
13th nationally.
Some of that is Charlotte. What's Healy? Is that the coach?
Yeah. Yep.
They run, like, I think this past year, like, they were still pretty high up with motion. So I think that's part of what Charlotte does. But if we're starting to kind of, with the whole point of what we've learned from this series, right, and start kind of spinning it forward a little bit, is that Alex Atkins has experience running an offense with pre-play motion. And there's a lot of like NFL trends that show like the most successful passing offenses in the last year or two have been heavily reliant on these declarations that AB mentioned, where you're trying to kind of get someone and see the motion or see the play and see the coverages with the motion, kind of setting that all up. So, it's easy to be critical of Dilly, and there's reasons for criticism, for sure. Like there are games and adjustments that I think you can critique, but there are also, when you don't have great personnel, you are limited. You have to use, though, everything that is in your tool bag, and I think the motion is a stat that we kind of stumbled upon that shows, hey, if you're a little bit more creative and you expand a little bit beyond your comfort zone, this could be something that helps open up things for you and punch above your talent level.
And I say all this, and we've been very critical about Mike Norvell's play calling over these past couple of games, but I think what he does well is he sets up these shot plays. He gives his guys an opportunity in the 3rd and 4th quarter to get these big plays. We saw in a few games them actually hit them. So while no one's perfect, there are strengths to how they call a game, and I think that there are things to grow on. We're just trying to paint a fuller picture of what we think could be improved.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to Kev's point and what he focused on with his video, which you guys have probably undoubtedly seen already, but like the play calling, how maybe it didn't help with the passing game. And a point that I made to Kevin, this is when we start looking at the totality of the offense and trying to find your strengths, is I think one reason why Mike Norvell and the offensive staff last year continued to be aggressive in terms of pushing the ball downfield and taking these deep shots is because that protects your run game as best as you can without being good at passing the football, right? Yep. If you're forcing the defense to keep a safety back, unless it's Clemson where they have a first-round cornerback and they're just going to dare you to beat them one-on-one, it's going to at least kind of force you to be honest sometimes. And you're protecting your best asset, which was your run game. They had the number 1 and number 2 running back in the ACC last year for yards per carry. So that is the totality and the collectiveness of like where you're trying to find balance. This brings me back to my point, guys. Like if if you have a glaring weakness that in a personnel perspective, that makes things difficult. If you have two, offensive line and wide receiver, you're kind of SOL. You're dead on
Yep,
arrival for the most
absolutely.
part, and I think that's largely what we've seen the last 2 years. Is personnel has made you have to be perfect or close to it as a play caller, and obviously no coach is going to be perfect.
No, no, no coach is going to go call a touchdown play every time. If they did, they'd be getting paid a lot more money, and they wouldn't be coaching at Florida State. I mean, just is what it is. I think it's easy for us to sit and be critical and look at data, and I'm sure that Kenny probably after the season, when they do a lot of their self scouting, sat down, looked back, and thought of some of these areas where he could have been better. I mean, undoubtedly, Kenny Dillingham's a good coach and going to be successful out in Oregon. I wouldn't question that for a second. We've been critical of coaching tonight to some extent. That's not what we typically do. We try not to be overly critical of players here either. I think it fit kind of the forum of the conversation that we're having. But we obviously respect the hell out of all these guys and what they do. Whether it works or doesn't work, it doesn't matter. They're putting a lot of time and effort into this profession that's not easy, and it's easy for guys like us to sit on a YouTube channel and critique the hell out of them. So yeah, I think it's important to say those kinds of things too. People are wanting to know what the hell's going on with the chat. There's a lot of wild stuff going on tonight. Brendan came in here and
what's happening? What did you guys do?
I can't even say it out loud because I don't want it to be on the podcast.
Yeah, there's some inappropriate comments that have been popping up.
Some ads, some inappropriate ads.
Yeah. So
yeah. So I mean, I think it's time to put a bow on this whole conversation.
Yeah, it's been an hour. Time has flown by as we've talked about this game.
I think that we've painted a good picture of the offensive line being a major issue, the wide receiver position being a major issue, and Jordan Travis not being as much of an issue, but potentially what was going on with some of the schematical stuff didn't necessarily help the passing game, which was our focus. It may have been good for the offense as a whole, not great on for the passing game specifically. Putting a bow on it all, going into next year, a crucial season, year 3 for Mike Norvell. I would say, first off, just rewatching the spring game, rewatched it again the other day. We obviously did a big spring game breakdown on X's and O's if you guys want to go look for that. I could already see a lot of difference. They use more motion in the game itself. They work the middle of the field. I mean, there were a lot of tight end or a lot of wide choice type stuff.
Yeah,
they were throwing in that game, and it's a spring game. It means very little, but it's important as we've sat here and talked about a lot of this stuff to kind of reflect and what evidence we do have of how things may change. We're able to go back and look at some of that stuff. They started working the middle of the field a little bit more. They started using a little bit more motion. So moving it down the line, maybe we're going to see some of these things that we feel like Jordan Travis has been better at over the last year. The offense as a whole had more success with, coupled with some improved wide receiver play, some improved offensive line play. We may see an improved passing game.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I guess the final question I want to leave you guys with. So this might be a tough question, but I think it's an interesting one. So Jordan Travis finished the year last year as the 43rd most efficient passer in the country. Now you've added across the offensive line, you've added across the wide receiver core, and I think that Alex Atkins has a better resume than Kenny Dillingham in terms of play calling in his single year at Charlotte. Take that for what it is. So I think we all agree that in every aspect you've probably improved, but probably not blown anybody out of the water. So where do you think Jordan Travis finishes as a passer if he was 43rd in 2021?
So we assume that there's a handful of guys that are leaving that have gone to the NFL or exhausted their eligibility, right? At the top of that list. So
yeah.
I mean, I think we start the conversation with, like, if I'm setting the spread, like 25th is like, I think the number of, like, and that's not even including the rushing yards. We're just talking about him as a passer.
Passing efficiency.
Can he be a top 25 most efficient passer in the country? And I think there are a lot of indications to say yes. Like the wide receivers will be at least marginally better.
Yep.
The offensive line will at least be marginally better. Jordan Travis, the one stat that Kev put out that we can't project is like what happens in year 3 with Mike Norvell, the quarterback. Right? That's super interesting, intriguing. And Jordan Travis, if he continues to progress, and the coaching staff's more familiar with him, I think top 25 is kind of where I would put it, guys. I think that's super reasonable. And if he is a top 25 passer and plays every single game this season and still has that athleticism as a runner, that probably equates to a win total that FSU fans would probably be pretty pleased with. That would help out Coach Norvell on the recruiting
desperately
trail.
Needs.
Right. What about you guys?
Well, I want to spin this question a little bit differently, and then I want to hear Kev's thought on that. If Jordan Travis pushes at 43rd again, and your wide receiver room is better and your offensive line room is better, is that enough to get you to where this team kind of needs to get to win-wise?
I think if he's 43rd still with an improved offensive line and wide receiver, because that's all going to factor in, right? Yards after catch, all of these things all factor into passing efficiency. If he's still 43rd, that means he actually got worse this season than he was last season. I don't think that's going to cut it. I think your defense is going to be better. But I think your schedule is in a weird way tougher next year, and so you can't be the same this year as you were last year. And I'm not convinced that our running game is going to be any better this year than it was last year. I think Benson's good, but I don't know if he's proven that he's going to be an upgrade over Corbin right off the bat. So I think if he's still 43rd, you're still looking at a top 50-ish offense in advanced metrics, and I don't think that's enough to really win 7 games.
So where's your line at for him then?
He needs to be a top 30 passer next year.
Top 30? Yep.
Yeah. I think if he's a top 30 passer, your 7 games is something that we're not worrying about at the end of the season.
So we when we looked at some of that offensive line data earlier, Robert Scott was at 15 pressures with 15 blown assignments, whatever, without it turning into a pressure. I think if you eliminate just a handful of pressures for Jordan on standard passing downs, I think it's going to easily get him there. Because I do think he's a player who's made the growth that needs to be. It isn't interesting that we have no data for a third-year quarterback in the Mike Norvell system. That's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, maybe we went back to Arizona State, but I don't think he was there for that long. So
I mean, I think I tend to agree. I think he's going to slot somewhere in that 25 to 30 range, and I think that's enough to get the job done.
Yep.
Ooh, so we're bullish. We're optimistic
the job.
about the
We're winning
passing
national
game.
championship.
All right.
You hear it. Coach AB, Florida State 2021, 2022.
Whoa. I already set the bar at 7 wins.
7 wins. If we can win 7 wins this year, the program is not going to fall apart overnight.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that either, but
well, it might take 2 days.
The passing game's not going to fall apart because that's what this is about.
We're only talking passing game. All right. Well, so I think we've rambled long enough. It's been an hour and some odd minutes. If you're listening to the podcast, thanks for listening. If you've been watching this, thanks for watching. Make sure in the comments on the article or on this YouTube video, ask us any questions. We're going to be there answering any questions. Obviously, there are differing opinions as we're forecasting the future, but I thank you guys for joining me on this Tuesday night. Thanks all the comments that we got, and we will see you guys soon.
Bye.